Trump faces a Middle East flashpoint, the decision that could shape what comes next. A Middle East brink of war headline travels fast. But for reality-based reporting, the first question is always, what decision is actually on the table right now, and what can we verify about the risks? Here's the verified core. The Trump administration is running a dual-track strategy toward Iran, diplomacy backed by military pressure. In early February 2026, major outlets reported indirect U.S.-Iran talks in Oman, with President Trump describing the talks as very good, while warning of steep consequences if no deal is reached. Sources, number 1, number 2. At the same time, Trump has publicly floated sending a second U.S. aircraft carrier to the Middle East, and U.S. Central Command has publicized senior visits aboard USS Abraham Lincoln in the Arabian Sea. Overlay that with rising friction in the Gulf. AP reported Iran seized 2 foreign oil tankers in the Persian Gulf on February 5, 2026, accusing them of fuel smuggling. AP also reported that on February 3rd, a U.S. Navy F-35C shot down an Iranian drone that aggressively approached the Abraham Lincoln in the Arabian Sea, and that Iranian forces harassed a U.S.-flagged merchant vessel in the Strait of Hormuz the same day. And now comes the Flashpoint decision. How far does Washington go to increase pressure economically, militarily, and at sea without triggering escalation it can't control? The Wall Street Journal reported U.S. officials have discussed seizing tankers carrying Iranian oil as a pressure tactic while weighing the risk of Iranian retaliation, such as mining the Strait of Hormuz. Separately, the White House fact sheet on February 6th described an executive order reaffirming the Iran national emergency and establishing a process to impose tariffs on countries that acquire goods or services from Iran. The Federal Register published the executive order text. Tonight, we'll do 4 things: separate what's confirmed from what's unconfirmed, lay out the timeline, explain the policy mechanism behind the pressure levers, and then walk through 3 scenarios for what happens next, with the specific evidence that would confirm each path. What's confirmed versus unconfirmed. Confirmed indirect U.S.-Iran talks took place in Oman in early February 2026, with Trump publicly signaling optimism mixed with threats of consequences. Trump said he is considering deploying a second aircraft carrier to the region, a posture signal reported by major outlets. U.S. Central Command published a release describing CENTCOM leadership and senior envoys visiting USS Abraham Lincoln in the Arabian Sea on February 7, 2026. AP reported a U.S. Navy F-35C shot down an Iranian drone that approached USS Abraham Lincoln in the Arabian Sea on February 3, 2026, after de-escalatory measures. AP reported Iran seized 2 foreign oil tankers on February 5, 2026, accusing them of smuggling about 1 million liters of fuel. The White House fact sheet states Trump signed an executive order on February 6, 2026, reaffirming the national emergency with respect to Iran and creating a process for tariffs on countries buying Iranian goods or services. The executive order text was published in the Federal Register. The Wall Street Journal reported the U.S. is weighing tanker seizures as a pressure tool and described concerns about retaliation and oil market disruption. Bloomberg reported that some supertanker operators sped up through the Strait of Hormuz amid rising U.S.-Iran tensions, citing ship tracking data. Unconfirmed or not independently verifiable with our current source set. Any claim that a specific strike plan is finalized or scheduled for a set date. We have public threats and posture signals, but not an announced operational decision. The exact terms Iran is willing to accept in talks beyond general public positions. Reporting indicates gaps, but negotiated text has not been released. What would confirm? For a military strike decision, an official U.S. government statement, congressional notification, allied briefings, or on-the-record confirmation by Tier A outlets citing multiple officials, plus observable force movement consistent with an imminent operation. For a deal, a published joint statement, IAEA access steps, sanctions relief documentation, or formal texts acknowledged by both governments. How we got here. This flashpoint did not appear overnight. In the backdrop is a pattern: crisis, de-escalation, then renewed pressure. Early February 2026, the diplomacy channel. Financial Times reported Trump praising the Oman talks as very good, warning of steep consequences if no deal is reached. AP reported Netanyahu pressed to broaden the agenda beyond nuclear limits to include missiles and proxies, with Trump saying Tehran wants a deal. Whether or not you agree with Netanyahu's push, it matters because it raises the bar for what success looks like, and higher bars can make failure more likely. February 3rd, 2026, a kinetic moment at sea. AP reported the U.S. shot down an Iranian drone that approached USS Abraham Lincoln, with CENTCOM describing the drone's intent as unclear and its approach as aggressive. AP also reported Iranian forces harassed a U.S.-flagged merchant vessel in the Strait of Hormuz the same day. February 5th, 2026, Iran seizes tankers. AP reported Iran seized 2 foreign oil tankers in the Persian Gulf, accusing them of smuggling fuel, and said crew members were in custody. February 6, 2026, pressure levers widen. The White House fact sheet says Trump signed an executive order reaffirming the Iran national emergency and creating a process to impose tariffs on countries that acquire goods or services from Iran. The Federal Register publication provides the legal text and structure. February 7th, 2026, posture messaging aboard the carrier. CENTCOM published a release about the commander's visit to USS Abraham Lincoln in the Arabian Sea, with senior envoys aboard observing flight operations. February 10-11, 2026, the escalation diplomacy squeeze becomes explicit. The Washington Post reported Trump mulling a second carrier off Iran as Netanyahu traveled to Washington for talks. AP reported Netanyahu pressing for expanded talks while Trump said Tehran wants a deal. The picture is a classic pressure cooker. Negotiations proceed, but Gulf incidents and enforcement options raise the chance of miscalculation. The mechanism. To understand Trump's decision, we need to define the toolkit on the table. There are 3 main levers: military posture, economic coercion, and maritime enforcement. Military posture, signaling, and deterrence. When a president says second aircraft carrier, it's not only about firepower. It's about signaling resolve, reassuring partners, and altering Iran's risk calculus. The Washington Post described Trump considering a second carrier and a broader buildup, and CENTCOM's release shows Washington placing senior leadership visibly on the carrier deck, a message aimed at multiple audiences: Iran, allies, and domestic politics. But posture has costs. A buildup increases the chance of close encounters, drones, fast boats, aircraft, and ships operating near each other. AP's report on the February 3rd drone shootdown is a case study. A single approach, one misread, and you're suddenly in a kinetic exchange. Economic coercion, tariffs, and sanctions logic. The White House fact sheet states the February 6th executive order establishes a process to impose additional duties, for example, 25%, on goods imported into the United States that are products of any country that directly or indirectly purchases, imports, or otherwise acquires any goods or services from Iran, in accordance with subsections described in the order. This is a form of secondary pressure. Instead of only punishing Iran, it pressures third countries to reduce business with Iran or face higher costs in the U.S. market. That could affect global supply chains and diplomatic relationships, especially with countries that buy Iranian oil or trade goods. Maritime enforcement, the tanker seizure debate. The Wall Street Journal reported U.S. officials have discussed seizing tankers carrying Iranian oil to pressure Tehran, but fear retaliation and market disruption. This lever matters because oil revenue is a key source of state capacity, and because maritime enforcement happens in a tight geography where accidents can escalate. Bloomberg reported some tanker operators sped through the Strait of Hormuz amid rising tensions, citing ship tracking data. Put together, Trump's Flashpoint decision is not one button. It's a menu: ratchet up deterrence, expand economic penalties, tighten maritime enforcement, or trade some pressure for verifiable concessions. Before we go further, one verification principle. In this space, decision does not mean speech. A president can threaten and posture without issuing executable orders. So we track decisions in documents and deployments, published executive orders, Federal Register notices, sanctions actions, CENTCOM releases, and force moves that independent reporters can confirm. Now, a deeper look at the law and policy, how the national emergency framework works. The White House fact sheet says the February 6th order reaffirms the ongoing national emergency with respect to Iran. That language matters because an emergency declaration underpins certain executive authorities for trade and sanctions. The Federal Register publication gives the operational spine, monitoring, recommendations, and the possibility of imposing an additional ad valorem duty, for example, 25%, on products of countries that buy Iranian goods or services. Why this matters to allies. Secondary pressure is politically sensitive. Some partners will see it as necessary to close sanctions evasion. Others will see it as extraterritorial enforcement that forces hard trade-offs. That tension becomes part of the flashpoint. Washington is not only trying to influence Tehran, it is also trying to shape the behavior of Tehran's customers. Maritime enforcement is different from tariffs. Tariffs are slow pressure. Maritime actions are fast pressure, and they happen in tight corridors where the cost of error is immediate. The Wall Street Journal reported U.S. officials have discussed seizing tankers carrying Iranian oil but fear retaliation, including the possibility of mining the Strait of Hormuz. Sources, number 7. AP's reporting that Iran seized 2 foreign oil tankers on February 5th shows Tehran also uses seizures as leverage, and then there's the strait itself. Bloomberg reported some supertanker operators sped up through the Strait of Hormuz amid rising tensions, citing ship tracking data and noting that about a quarter of the world's seaborne oil trade moves through that choke point. That matters because brink is often priced before it is fought. Risk changes behavior now. Speed, routing, and insurance, and those choices ripple into costs. Information hazards, why rumors can escalate real risk. In crises, misinformation doesn't just mislead viewers, it can distort incentives. If publics believe war is inevitable, leaders face higher pressure to act. That is why Tier A reporting and primary documents matter. For example, CENTCOM's February 7th release provides a concrete, checkable fact. Senior officials were aboard USS Abraham Lincoln observing flight operations in the Arabian Sea. So what exactly is Trump being pushed to decide? Based on verified reporting, it is a choice among imperfect options. Keep negotiating while tightening economic screws through legal mechanisms like the February 6th order. Increase military pressure by adding forces, potentially a second carrier, to raise the cost of stalling. Move enforcement to the waterline, seizing tankers, interdicting shipments, knowing that the closer you get to the strait, the higher the chance of retaliation and escalation. That's why flashpoint is the right word. It's not a war announcement. It's a point where small decisions can cascade. Where this becomes a Trump decision in practical terms is sequencing. Do you intensify pressure first to force concessions, or do you hold back to keep talks alive? The Washington Post report about weighing a second carrier captures that sequencing debate in public form, escalation as leverage versus escalation as risk. AP's report on the drone shoot-down shows how quickly risk can become reality, even when neither side says it wants a war. And the Federal Register text matters because it converts threat into process, which can harden expectations on all sides. The key is verification. Watch what is signed, deployed, seized, or scheduled, then compare that record to the rhetoric in the open. Key players and incentives, United States. The U.S. incentive is to stop nuclear advancement, deter attacks on U.S. forces and shipping, and demonstrate that diplomacy is backed by leverage. That's visible in the combination of Oman talks reporting, carrier posture, and the executive order framework. Iran government, IRGC, maritime forces, Iran's incentive is to preserve its sovereignty and deterrence while seeking relief from pressure. Its actions in the Gulf, including tanker seizures and harassment allegations described by AP, also signal that Tehran can raise global costs. At the same time, Iran's public posture, as reflected in the talk track reported by major outlets, suggests it wants to keep negotiations alive on terms it can defend domestically. Israel Netanyahu government. AP reported Netanyahu is pushing the U.S. to broaden talks beyond the nuclear file to include missiles and proxies. That matters because it changes the negotiating zone. If the U.S. adopts a broader demand set, Iran may walk. If the U.S. doesn't, Israel fears a deal, leaves key threats intact. Shipping and energy markets, operators, insurers, consumers. Markets don't need missiles to move. They need uncertainty. Bloomberg's report of tankers speeding through Hormuz illustrates how operators adapt behavior when they fear disruption. The WSJ report explains why tanker seizures, mining fears, and spillover can create price shocks even without a formal blockade. Real-world impact, markets, and costs. The immediate economic impact channel is oil and shipping risk. If enforcement escalates, like seizing tankers, Iran may respond asymmetrically and insurers may price risk higher. WSJ describes the fear of retaliation and market disruption. Bloomberg shows behavior shifts in tanker transit speed. That's not a prediction of oil prices tomorrow. It's the mechanism by which geopolitical risk becomes a consumer cost. Allies and diplomacy. A second carrier deployment would reassure some partners and alarm others. Allies that rely on Gulf energy flows want stability. Regional partners worry about being pulled into a wider conflict. The posture is also a negotiating signal. A visible buildup can bring urgency to talks, but it can also harden positions if either side feels cornered. Voters and domestic politics. Strong versus reckless is the U.S. domestic frame. A successful deal can be sold as preventing war. A coercive action can be sold as restoring deterrence. But a miscalculation, a strike, a ship hit, a spill, casualties, can swing opinion quickly. The February 3rd shoot-down shows how fast incidents can become headlines. What happens next? 3 scenarios. Scenario 1, managed pressure, continued diplomacy most likely. What it looks like, more Oman-style talks, combined with the tariffs process, plus sustained but controlled military posture. Confirmation signals, scheduled follow-on meetings, continued official emphasis on negotiation, and no major new maritime incidents. Scenario 2, maritime escalation spiral. What it looks like, an attempted tanker seizure or interdiction triggers retaliation, harassment of shipping, drone threats, or mining risks, producing a cycle of responses. Confirmation signals, official U.S. announcements of seizures, maritime advisories, verified attacks or attempted boardings, and Tier A multi-source reporting with named officials and locations. Scenario 3, breakdown and strike planning becomes operational. What it looks like, talks collapse, force movements surge, and Washington publicly frames action as unavoidable. Confirmation signals, official statements, congressional briefings, coalition alignment, and force posture consistent with imminent operations, such as multiple carriers, publicly acknowledged. What we still don't know yet, the specific negotiating text on offer, what Iran will concede, what the U.S. will lift, and what verification is on the table. Whether maritime enforcement, tanker seizures, will move from internal debate to executed policy. Whether a second carrier deployment becomes an order, not a signal. What to watch next. 1. Primary documents. White House Federal Register, CENTCOM releases for concrete actions and dates. 2. Tier A confirmations. AP, FT, WAPO follow-ups tying claims to named officials and clear timelines. 3. Gulf incident tracking. Verified reports of seizures, drone incidents, or harassment with location and parties named. If you want verified explainers that separate confirmed facts from hot takes, subscribe to the Brief Desk. We update when the record changes. Neutral disclaimer. We report what can be verified and label uncertainty clearly. Analysis is not proof. We will revise this story as new primary documents and Tier A reporting emerge.